I'm going to talk a little bit about the biology of fruit fly, Queensland fruit fly, what it looks like, how it works and why it does that, and a little bit about some of the traps and baits and things that are out there on the market, just to introduce them to you. Queensland fruit fly, as you're horribly aware, has become a big problem in southeastern Australia, in particularly over the last 10 years or so. One of the La Nina events that we had in southeast Australia in 2010, 11, 12 created a weather system that seemed to be to facilitate, to encourage the growth of Queensland fruit fly. Unfortunately, there's not many crops out there, or fruit, that Queensland fruit fly won't infest. Some of them are what you might call a low host, such as say durian or rose hips. But when the population gets high, those fruit become susceptible to fruit fly because if there's nothing else around, they try. Queensland fruit fly is an exploitative insect. If you had a tennis ball and made it wet and hung it out in a tree, they will try to lay their eggs into it. They may even succeed. The eggs hatch and so forth. So that's why some of them are really good hosts, peaches, nectarines, that sort of thing. Some of them are poor hosts. But under population pressure, those host statuses change. It's just something to be aware of. If you put traps out, there's quite a few different types of flies that sometimes get in, other insects that get into traps. So here you have a Queensland fruit fly on a sticky trap, and down here you've got some Drosophila or vinegar fly, often called fruit flies. And the geneticists call them fruit flies, but fruit fly researchers say true fruit flies and vinegar fly, or ferment fly, or Drosophila. You generally find these in your fruit bowl, in your home. If you happen to have some grapes or fruit that's overripe, bananas, they love them. And they seem to come out of nowhere and grow there. Sometimes in a trap you'll see flies that look very similar to fruit fly, Queensland fruit fly. These are actually two species of native fruit fly, which not many people know a lot about, what they breed in and all that sort of thing. But you'll notice that they've got very thick margins on their wings compared to the Queensland fruit fly, which is a very narrow band. So they're native flies, but non-pests. And there are a bunch of other flies that sometimes you get. This one has reared its ugly head in South Australia over the years, the island fruit fly. And it generally attacks overripe fruit, so fruit that shouldn't be picked and harvested and packed. This is one of my favourites. That's the boatman fly. When he or she sits on something, he moves his wings like the oars of a boat. So they call him boatman fly. Native insect, non-pest. And the metallic green tomato fly, which does get into green tomatoes. I don't know if you've got them around here, but their larvae just look like queens. You do have them, yeah. A native insect can be a pest, particularly in fruit that's overripe on the vine. Very shiny green. It's sort of pretty, except they get into your tomatoes. And there's other flies that you find out in the field too. A lot of them are actually beneficial insects. A lot of them, not so much the musket fly, but most of them either feed on rotting organic material, and some of them, like the little sepsid and the long-legged fly, and the hoverfly, they prey on aphids and thrips and things like that. So they're beneficials. And the hoverfly can even though it looks very much like a fruit fly with the colours, it's a good pollinator of some crops too. So it's a good beneficial insect. I'm going to show you now how quickly a generation of fruit flies can become a problem. In the laboratory, we got one female fruit fly, and we mated her overnight. They mate and collected the eggs from her over her lifetime. She laid eggs for a further 66 days based on that one mating, and in that time, she laid over 2,000 eggs, which then produced 900 pupae, and out of those pupae we got fertile adults, 824 of them, 400 females. So after one mating, one female produces 400 more females. If you multiply that by another 400 in another generation and another after that, you can see how quickly they can spread and how quickly that populations can expand. That's why getting onto fruit fly early is the thing to do. As another example of that sort of thing, we had 9 untended feijoa trees, 2 metres, each of them about 2 metres high. I collected 10,000 fruit, and out of them I got 120,000 adult flies, which means that crop, which hadn't been sprayed or stripped or anything like that, produced over that season 120,000 flies, half of which would be female. So what's that, 60,000 females possibly out there and spreading into the next orchard. So another horror story, I would say. So how does it all happen? This is the start of their life cycle. This is a Queensland fruit fly female. You can tell by, she's got this, it's called a scape, a sheath, from which she extrudes her ovipositor or stinger, and that stinger can actually extend from the base of her body another 4 to 5 millimetres. It's got a sharp point on the end, and what she does is positions herself on the fruit and drills down or pokes the fruit, the ovipositor into the fruit, waggles it around a little bit to create a bit of a cavern for the eggs, and she lays her eggs. In a cherry she might lay about 3, 4, 5 eggs. In a grapefruit or an orange or an avocado she might lay up to 10 or 12. So she knows how big the fruit is, how well it would support her eggs, and she lays her eggs accordingly. If the fruit's already got a hole in it from a wind or a stick or a bird peck or something, the fly will probably lay its eggs in there if it's not too calloused up. So fruit flies mate, Queensland fruit fly mates at dusk and only there. And the temperature has to be above around 15 to 16 degrees or else she won't mate. So when your dusk temperatures in August, September start to reach around the 15, 16 degree mark, if you've had fruit flies, then that's when they'll be mating, and 2 or 3 days later they can begin to lay eggs if the temperature's right. So here they're eggs. The eggs are about 1 millimetre long and 1/3 of a millimetre wide, slightly banana shaped, white and translucent. After about 1 or 2 days, maybe 3 if it's too cold, the eggs start to hatch. And over the next 8 to several weeks, depending on the temperatures and the type of fruit they're in, the larvae will grow up to around about 8 millimetres long, and then they start to burrow their way out of the fruit and hop out of the fruit, whether the fruit's on the ground or if the fruit's still hanging in the tree for some reason. It then jumps down into the soil or grass litter underneath the tree to form their pupae. And they stay there for around 10 to 20 days before the next adult fly comes out. It takes that fly approximately a minimum of 5 or 6 days to become sexually mature, and up to a couple of weeks, but generally around a week to become sexually mature and then start the whole thing all over again. Internal damage can be very severe. Cherries, blueberries, oranges and peaches are quite affected. Cherries are a bit of a difficult case because for fruit fly, because generally if the cherries are harvested before Christmas or thereabouts, they generally, in this region or in Victoria and southern New South Wales, they're generally safe because the population hasn't built up enough in that time. But with climate change and all that sort of thing, that could make differences over in the future. Blueberries are a poor host, but can be infested. Oranges, again, not the best host, but thinner skin varieties, particularly mandarins and so forth, can be heavily infested. The Meyer lemon, the thin-skinned or the lemonade lemons, are also highly attractive to fruit fly, although the Eurekas and Lisbons less so. So there's a lot of variation in the hostability, if you like, of different fruits and different cultivars of fruits. When the fly comes out of the fruit, it creates these holes. As you can see, this is a bit of a scary one for me because these peaches were were very immature. These peaches were found on the ground in the Hunter Valley a few years ago when, for the first time ever, a lot of Hunter Valley table grapes and wine grapes became infested with fruit fly for the first time ever. And what happened was then they had a very warm winter and a lot of weed growth growing up around the vines, which they weren't able to get on and keep the weeds down. So, and they had very small populations of fruit fly. They must have, but they really didn't know. Any berry that fell off, they just thought was normal shattering. But because of the warmer winter weather, the moisture, extra moisture, the weed for protection for the adults, the population exploded, and the grapes then were harvested, and the flies had nowhere to go, so they started stinging these very green little fruit. And this is one of the problems with Queensland fruit fly and why it's become so successful, is that it will keep trying anything that's round and juicy. And the thing is, when they lay their eggs into the fruit, they actually put some bacteria in with the eggs, and those bacteria help break down the fruit so that when the eggs hatch, it's all mushy and there's some protein available for them straight away. And that's what I think caused these things. They kept hammering the peaches, causing the rotting, and then you ended up with some little bags of mush which the fruit flies were able to infest and survive in. This is a very complicated thing, but it tells you a whole year of what's happening with fruit fly. In the winter time, in the blue, populations are very small, but those populations are small because we're looking at trap information. Fruit flies don't go to traps very easily in the winter because it's too cold. They're not moving. They're hibernating almost underneath, in warm spots within the landscape. So as the weather warms up, they come out of hibernation, if you like, and start exploding. First generation, second generation, and you get worse and worse. Each of I've sort of formulated this for Riverland and Sunraysia so that we have what fruit are ripening in each season. Of course, that will vary from spot to spot because of season, but if you have a look at apricots in December, I've labelled them as a high host, or a favoured host for fruit fly. But one of the interesting things about flies over the season is that it's the autumn flies really that are those that are going to survive the autumn and winter as adults and come out again in spring. So autumn is a really important time for fruit fly control too. In fact, as we all say, the whole year. But these are the ones that are the inoculum for the next season. I'm banging on about fruit flies in winter. It's because they're the ones, if they survive the winter, then they're going to come back and bite you in summer and autumn. As I said, in most parts of Southeast Australia, they survive as adults. Any eggs, larvae or pupae on the landscape after about middle of May are probably going to die in the fruit. Those in the fruit before that will probably survive as adults. So it's a bit of a cut-off, but that would vary from spot to spot. Like I said, it's generally too cold for flies to be captured in traps. They're more interested at the moment in surviving the winter, moving about a little bit as it warms up, finding moisture from dew and any protein or any feed that they can from any naturally occurring bacteria, fungi and yeasts that are on the tree surfaces. I've found that a lot of flies overwinter in heavy canopied citrus trees that happen to be close to the house. So they move up from the orchard, particularly deciduous orchards, and they move towards the house because they can feel the heat. In fact, they can see the heat. They have infrared vision coming from the house, and they make their way towards the warmer parts of the landscape like a moth to the flame. And once they find the spot where they can't move either way anymore, they stay there over winter. And if it gets really cold, they'll die. But unfortunately, we don't know exactly how long it has to be cold. There were some previous researchers have said that 3 days where the minimum temperature, 3 days in a row with a minimum temperature at less than -5 will kill adults. But that doesn't occur here anymore, does it? -5. So it's quite likely then that if there are adults here in the winter and they find a warm spot, they will survive here. As I said, they move to the warmer spots, they go into slow motion, and they can survive like that for several months until spring comes up again. So in the winter time and late autumn, winter and early spring, they slow down, and if they can be protected from predators, such as other birds, other insects, frogs and lizards, of course, will also have stopped moving around at that time, they'll survive several months. In the summertime, they only live about 6 to 8 weeks or so, maybe a little bit longer, because they're using up all their energy to fly around, mate, lay eggs and all that sort of thing. So in the winter time, there are warm spots in the backyard. And I'm describing this situation to also include commercial growers too, because most commercial growers have a house yard with maybe a few fruit trees in it. But it's not really the fruit on the fruit trees that we're looking at in the winter time. We're just looking at the canopy and the warmth. So if you've got like a lemon near the house, it'll be a warm haven for fruit flies. Even near the compost heap, there's a bit of extra heat there, and near where you might have some chickens or something. So those are the sort of spots, if I were you, I'd put some winter baiting, maybe once or twice through the winter, and possibly either a male targeting or a female targeting trap, put them out in about August or thereabouts. That variation of temperatures even occurs within a tree. So this is an avocado tree in Griffith in mid-August, many years ago. You can see that the ambient temperature is around about -1, but there are portions in the tree which get up to 8 degrees. So even though the Bureau of Meteorology might measure -1 degrees Celsius, there are parts of the orchard which are as high as 8 degrees. And if I was a fruit fly, and a smart one, which they are, that's where I'd be overwintering, somewhere near that warmth. And of course, dew will form on that the next morning, and they've got the water there. Even across the landscape, there's a high degree of variation in the temperature. This is the town of Cobram, just here in Victoria. There's the Murray River. It's around about 6 degrees or thereabouts at 10:30 in the morning, mid-August. But you'll find even across the landscape where there's a lot of orchards and farms and so forth, there are patches that are very warm. These purple and red patches are between 12 and 16 degrees. And they're certainly the right temperatures for flies to move around. But there are patches that are cold. That might be a dam or something like that, and so forth. I can't explain why they're purple, why they're warmer than others. It might be height or altitude, or it might be rocks in the soil as heat sinks or something like that. But that's just an interesting. That's from a Landsat vision of Cobram a few years ago. This is the sort of thing that the growers and the home gardeners have to do. Monitor fruit for fruit fly, have some traps out to see if there are any flies around there, and if necessary bait and so forth. We're telling growers around in Victoria and New South Wales where fruit flies have become established over the last decade that baiting early is the way to get rid of the early population and hence the later populations. If you can just handle the fruit, and if you feel any soft patches here or there on the fruit, it's possible that you've got fruit fly in that patch. So what happens is the fly lays her eggs, the bacteria go in with it, the rot starts around the oviposition site underneath the skin, and you can actually feel it softening there. And if you can do that, cut it open, slice that off the top, turn the skin inside out, and with a magnifier, check to see if you can find any eggs or even empty eggs or larvae inside there. And we believe that monitoring the fruit in this way sometimes gets the fruit fly even before they might go into a trap, because by and large the traps catch male fruit fly, although there are some female ones. But I always recommend that any fruit that's lying around should be checked for fruit fly, not just in your orchard, but also in the house paddock, in the front yard, along the creek banks, around the fowl yard, and the roadsides, because there's a lot of fruit that are out there that could be the start of your next generation of fruit fly in your orchard, and they're beavering away in your backyard or out on the street. Here's some sting marks. Even a rose hip can get fruit fly in them. And this is just normal garden rose hip, Mr. Lincoln or something like that, just a normal one, and are quite visible. On the locust and the apple, sometimes you get this gum coming out of the apple, and sometimes that gum comes out in a string, and you end up with sort of strings of gum hanging out of the apple. Some varieties do that. Here's some Chardonnay wine grapes from the Hunter Valley at that time. Normally these grapes would drop off, but sometimes if the cluster of grapes is a solid cluster, they stay inside there and they don't drop off. But you can see the effect of the rot and all that sort of thing. And even if it goes rotten like that, the larvae will survive and become an adult. Blueberries and cherries, you can't actually see the sting mark unless you look very close. You just see the hole that's made. So some of them show sting marks and others don't. Boy, there's a lot of traps out there. All of them work, these male traps, all of them work on the principle of using a male lure called Q lure and some sort of toxicant inside. They all work reasonably well. Some work a little bit better than others. Some of them are what we call FIFO traps, the fly in, fly out trap. But most of them work pretty well indeed. You can have traps such as the Bugs for Bugs one and the BASF one that are not inside a trap, and that's called male annihilation technique. And they're of a sort of a price that you can have quite a few of them per hectare and impact on the male population then, and hopefully over time the female population. Yep, so there's a lot on the market and all of them work reasonably well, and you can even get male traps which don't have pesticides in them. The Wild May liquid, it's like a liquid Q lure, but it's based just on water as the toxicant. Or you can have sticky traps, such as those. You have to be careful in Victoria. A non-caged sticky trap is not allowed to be used because it can have an impact on frogs, birds, beneficial insects and so forth, get stuck to the tanglefoot. So in Victoria they allow a caged one like that. That's a medfly one over there, and they're primarily used in areas where Mediterranean fruit fly is dominant. And the biotrap has a sticky panel which works quite nicely too. This one here is quite an exciting one. This is a remote sensing fruit fly trap called Rapid Aim, and the fly goes in there, and there's technology in there that can detect whether it's a Queensland fruit fly or just some other insect. And when it detects that it's a Queensland fly, your app gives you a ding, and you look on it and say, oh, trap number 22 in block number 3 has got a fly in it. And so you can get real-time sensing of what's happening, and that's Rapid Aim. There's some protein-based traps, so you're presenting the fly with feed, and that pulls them in. Some of them are sticky ones, like the fruition trap, for instance. For Victorian use, the fruition trap has changed colour and is now caged, and they attract flies based on a fruit scent, such as like a guava fruit scent. And this one now has a mixture of the fruit scent and a protein feed-based thing. The BioTrap gel is a protein-based. The Ceratrap is a liquid version of a protein. These are the old-fashioned ones that school children make, just based on bottles with a hole in them, filled with yeast or beer or anything proteinaceous like that. This one is used against medfly in South Africa. It doesn't work on Queensland fruit fly, unfortunately, but the idea is good. So it's like a bait station where they have about 100 to 400 of them per hectare, and they're telling me that they have good control of medfly based on that. Over in South Africa, they're 20 cents each, or whatever it is in rand. So it's effective, cost effective too, and so forth. So protein-based traps are okay, but they don't have the pulling power of the male traps. Male traps can pull flies in 200 metres, even more sometimes, depending on wind, cold air drainage and all those other issues. Female traps, you'd be lucky to get 10 metres attraction to them. And there's lots of different protein-based baits out there. Most of them are based on either yeast protein or plant protein, and the Heim lure on the end from South Africa is based on animal protein, so they all work pretty well. The best trap is the one that you put in the right spot. If you put a trap out in the sun, it can overheat using the greenhouse effect. So one of these traps we put out, we put a few of them out. This is the common one used by governments in Eastern Australia in particular. I put that out on a 26 degree day in the sun, and the temperature inside went up to nearly 50 degrees. Fruit fly won't go into a trap that's got that much infrared coming out of it, too hot for them. They'll go into a shady spot. Around 52 degrees or so, any protein or some chemicals inside the trap, the attractants and even the toxicants, can be denatured by the heat. So the traps can become quite useless under those sort of conditions. So putting them on an eastern or southeastern facing aspect inside the canopy of the tree is far more effective than outside. Exclusion netting is highly recommended for home gardens that are affected by fruit fly. You can get single fruit covers, which are quite often used in Japan and China and all that for highly valued products. Or you can get sleeves that cover over a truss or a bunch of fruit along a branch, or you can get almost a whole orchard. There's a couple of things you have to be careful of with covers. One is that you don't cover them before the bees have pollinated the fruit. Two, you don't allow the netting to rest on any fruit, because the fly can come along on the outside, sit on the netting and then sting the fruit through the netting. Orchard covers not only reduce the amount of light on the fruit, so you might end up with less coloured fruit, it also interacts on the air movement underneath, which can promote the growth of things like thrips and mealybugs and so forth. So there's some of the issues that come up with netting. But certainly for home gardeners, netting has become very successfully used in parts of Victoria where they've only just recently got outbreaks of fruit fly. So there's a lot of community information out there on netting, which is showing some success. There's a number of approved pesticides. This is just the current list of fruit fly registrations from the APVMA. But you must look at the labels, because some of these products are okay to use on peaches but not on blueberries, that sort of thing. Some of these are okay to use in Victoria but not New South Wales. Some of them are good for medfly but not for Queensland fruit fly. So unfortunately there's a lot of variation on the labels. So rather than just go off that, make sure you have the right chemicals for the right purpose in the right state. This is far too much information, but what I'm trying to say here is that if you have fruit fly, or if you might have fruit fly, or you're hoping you don't have fruit fly but you might, always start early with your certainly with the monitoring. But if you can reduce weed growth between your trees, any fruit fly that get in there will be less likely to survive because they'll have too much exposure and so forth. August is a really good time to make sure you've got traps. Make sure the traps that you do have are in within use-by dates. Same with chemicals if you're going to, and baits and so forth, and whatnot. I think you'll find that the take-home message is that Queensland fruit fly needs to be controlled all year round, because they're here, well, hopefully not here in the winter, but where they become established in Victoria and New South Wales, they overwinter as adults, and then they start to build up their populations as spring approaches. Feral fruit, any fruit lying around that be infested, gets infested, and then the population explodes from then on after Christmas and into the summer and autumn when the major crops are in fruit.